The eviction notice was damp with rain, clutched in David's shaking hand as he stared at the woman standing on his doorstep. She looked like an ordinary college teacher, carrying nothing but a worn, leather satchel and a quiet smile that didn't match the storm brewing in his life. David needed her rent money to keep a roof over his daughter's head, but he had no idea that opening his door to this stranger would dismantle everything he thought. He knew about power, wealth, and the true cost of a secret. Some people enter your life to help you survive, but others enter to change your destiny forever. The floorboards of the small terraced house in the outskirts of the city groaned under David's weight as he paced the kitchen. Every tick of the clock felt like a hammer blow to his chest. He was 34 years old, a widower, and a father to 7-year-old Lily, who was currently upstairs fast asleep, blissfully unaware that their world was tilting on its axis. Since the factory closure 6 months ago, David had scrambled for every odd job he could find, but the math simply didn't add up. The bills were higher than the stacks of leaflets he delivered, and the heating had been off for 3 weeks to save pennies for milk and bread. He felt like he was failing at the one job that mattered, being a provider. The idea to rent out the box room had come from a place of desperation. It was a tiny space, barely large enough for a single bed and a desk, but it was their only asset left. When the doorbell rang at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday evening, David expected a student or perhaps someone as down on their luck as he was. Instead, he found Clara. She was dressed in a simple wool coat and a scarf, her hair pulled back in a practical knot. She introduced herself as a substitute teacher at the local community college, looking for somewhere quiet and affordable. David noticed her shoes were sensible but well-worn, and her luggage was minimal. She didn't look like someone with a penny to spare, which made David feel a strange sense of kinship with her. He showed her the room, apologizing for the peeling wallpaper and the lack of modern amenities. Clara didn't seem to mind. In fact, she looked at the small window, overlooking the overgrown garden with a sense of genuine peace. She agreed to the price immediately, handing over the first month's rent in cash. That envelope of money felt like a life jacket to a drowning man. David thanked her profusely, his voice thick with an emotion he tried to hide. He told her she was saving them, though he phrased it as a simple business transaction. Clara just nodded, her eyes soft and observant, as if she could see the frayed edges of his soul through his tired smile. As the days turned into weeks, Clara became a ghost-like presence in the house, but a comforting one. She was out early and back late, always carrying a stack of papers to grade. Despite her busy schedule, she began to weave herself into the fabric of their lives in small, nearly invisible ways. She would leave a bowl of fruit on the counter for the house, or offer to help Lily with her reading, while David cooked their modest dinners. Lily, who had been withdrawn since her mother passed away, took to Clara instantly. There was a calmness about the teacher that acted as a balm for the young girl's anxiety. David watched from the doorway as Clara sat on the floor with Lily, patiently explaining the phonetics of a difficult word. He felt a flicker of hope he hadn't felt in years. However, David couldn't shake the feeling that Clara was more than she appeared. There were moments when he caught her staring out the window with a look of profound melancholy, a look that didn't belong to a simple schoolteacher. He noticed the way she spoke. Her vocabulary was refined, her manners impeccable, almost regal. One evening, he saw her talking on the phone in the hallway, her voice hushed and urgent. She mentioned names he didn't recognize and spoke of holdings and trustees. When she saw David, she hung up abruptly and offered a quick, forced smile. He didn't pry. He couldn't afford to. As long as the rent was paid and Lily was happy, Clara's secrets were her own. He was just grateful for the breathing room she had provided. The peace within the house was a fragile mask for the storm gathering outside. While Clara's rent covered the mortgage, it didn't cover the mounting medical debts from David's late wife's illness or the rising cost of living. One afternoon, David returned home to find a man in a sharp gray suit standing by the garden gate. The man looked out of place in their working-class neighborhood, his eyes scanning the property with a cold, analytical gaze. When David approached, the man handed him a business card for a major property development firm. They were buying up the entire street to build luxury flats, and David's landlord had already expressed interest in selling. David felt the ground vanish beneath his feet. If the landlord sold, they would be evicted with nowhere to go. He tried to argue, to say he had a sitting tenant and a child, but the man in the suit simply offered a thin, predatory smile and told him to expect a formal notice within the week. David walked into the house, his legs feeling like lead. He sat at the kitchen table burying his face in his hands. He felt a hand on his shoulder and looked up to see Clara. She had heard the entire exchange from the open window. For the first time, her calm exterior seemed to crack, replaced by a flash of intense, burning anger that surprised him. Over the next few days, the pressure intensified. The landlord called David, his voice filled with false sympathy, explaining that the offer from the developers was too good to refuse. He told David they had 30 days to vacate. David spent every night scouring the internet for affordable rentals. But the market was a desert. Everything was either too expensive or too far from Lily's school. He stopped eating properly, giving his portions to Lily and Clara, claiming he had already eaten at work. Clara noticed, of course. She began bringing home extra food from the college canteen, gourmet meals that seemed far too high quality for a community college. But David was too tired to question it. The tension in the house became palpable. David was a shell of a man, haunted by the fear of homelessness. He began to notice strange cars parked down the street, black SUVs with tinted windows that seemed to follow Clara when she went for her morning walks. He asked her about them once, but she brushed it off as coincidence, though her eyes betrayed a deep-seated anxiety. One night, David woke up to the sound of raised voices outside. He looked out the window and saw Clara standing by the SUVs, arguing with a man who looked like a bodyguard. The man was holding out a document, and Clara was shaking her head vehemently, her gestures sharp and defiant. The next morning, Clara was different. The quiet teacher was gone, replaced by someone who moved with a newfound steely resolve. She spent hours on her laptop, her fingers flying across the keys. When David tried to talk to her about the impending eviction, she looked him straight in the eye and told him not to worry. "Trust me, David," she said, her voice carrying a weight of authority that made him pause. "The world isn't always as cruel as it seems." David wanted to believe her, but he was a realist. He saw a woman who worked for a modest salary and lived in a rented box room. How could she possibly stop a multi-million-pound development firm? He felt a sense of dread that Clara was caught up in something dangerous, something that might put his daughter at risk. The confrontation came on a Tuesday, exactly 1 month after Clara had moved in. David was in the living room, packing their few belongings into cardboard boxes, his heart breaking with every toy of Lily's he wrapped in newspaper. There was a loud, demanding knock at the door. David opened it to find the landlord, accompanied by 2 men in suits and a legal representative. They weren't there to talk. They were there to deliver the final eviction order and ensure the property was ready for the surveyors. David felt a surge of helpless rage. He started to protest, his voice cracking as he spoke about his daughter. But the landlord cut him off, citing the legality of the sale. Suddenly, Clara stepped out from the hallway. She wasn't wearing her usual modest cardigan. She was wearing a tailored black blazer that David hadn't seen before. Her posture was erect, her gaze icy. "The sale will not be proceeding," she said clearly, her voice echoing in the small room. The landlord laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "And who are you, the help? This is a private matter between me and my tenant." Clara didn't flinch. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a thick folder, tossing it onto the coffee table. "My name is Clara Sterling," she said. The room went dead silent. The men in suits exchanged panicked glances. David watched, bewildered, as the lead developer's representative stepped forward, his face turning a ghostly shade of white. "Miss Sterling, we had no idea you were residing here. Your family has been looking for you for months." Clara ignored him, focusing her attention on the landlord. "I have just purchased the deed to this entire street through a private trust," she stated calmly. "The development project is canceled. Furthermore, I am now your landlord, and I am terminating your management contract effective immediately." The landlord stuttered, trying to find words, but the legal representative grabbed his arm, whispering urgently in his ear. They retreated from the house as if it were on fire. David stood frozen, his hand still gripping a half-packed box. He looked at Clara, really looked at her and saw the truth he had been missing. The Sterling name was synonymous with one of the largest shipping and real estate empires in the country. This woman, who had been helping Lily with her ABCs and eating modest stews at his table, was an heiress to a fortune beyond his comprehension. "Why?" he managed to whisper. "Why were you living here? Why didn't you say anything?" Clara sighed, the steel in her shoulders softening as the adrenaline faded. She looked at the humble living room, then at David, with a gaze full of complicated emotion. She explained that she had fled her life of privilege after her father's death. Her brothers were cold, calculating men who saw people as assets and land as profit. They had turned the family business into a machine that crushed smaller communities, and Clara couldn't bear to be a part of it anymore. She wanted to prove to herself that she could live a life of meaning without the Sterling name. She had taken the teaching job to feel a connection to the real world, to see the faces of the people her family usually ignored. "I didn't come here to save you, David," she said softly. "I came here to save myself." But seeing what they were trying to do to this street, to you and Lily, I couldn't stay hidden anymore. My secret wasn't worth your home. The aftermath of the revelation was a whirlwind of emotions. The news of the secret heiress hit the local papers, and for a few days the quiet street was swarmed by reporters. Clara handled it with a grace that David found intimidating. She didn't move out. Instead, she used her resources to secure the futures of everyone on the block. She set up a community trust that ensured the houses could never be bought out by developers, effectively gifting the residents the security they had nearly lost. David felt a profound sense of debt that weighed heavily on him. He felt small in the shadow of her massive influence, and the easy friendship they had shared felt suddenly complicated by the billions of pounds that stood between their social classes. He tried to keep his distance, feeling like a fool forever thinking she was just a struggling teacher. He went back to his job hunt with a renewed, almost frantic energy, wanting to prove he didn't need her charity. But Clara wouldn't allow the distance to grow. She cornered him in the kitchen one evening, the same kitchen where they had shared so many quiet moments. "You're looking at me differently," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "I'm still the same person who burned the toast last week." "David." He looked at her, seeing the heiress and the teacher at the same time. "It's not that simple, Clara. You're a Sterling. I'm a man who can't even afford to fix his own boiler." Clara stepped closer, her expression earnest. "Do you know what I saw when I walked into this house? I saw a man who worked himself to the bone for his daughter. I saw a home that had more love in it than any mansion I ever grew up in. You gave me a room when I had nothing but a fake name and a desire to disappear. You shared your food with me when you barely had enough for yourself. That's not charity, David, that's character. My money can buy buildings, but it could never buy the kindness you showed a stranger." David felt a lump form in his throat. He realized that in his pride, he was overlooking the most important lesson, that his value wasn't defined by his bank balance, but by the heart he had kept open despite his hardships. The emotional peak came a few days later when Clara presented David with a document. It wasn't a check or a gift of money. It was a partnership agreement for a new community youth center she was founding in the area. She wanted him to manage the facilities and the outreach programs, citing his deep connection to the neighborhood and his natural ability to care for others. "It's a real job, David, with a real salary. I need someone I can trust, someone who knows what this community actually needs." David looked at the papers, then at Lily, who was playing happily in the garden, no longer afraid of moving. He realized that Clara wasn't just giving him a job. She was giving him his dignity back. He wept then, deep, racking sobs of relief and gratitude, and Clara simply sat with him, a steady presence in the face of his vulnerability. Months passed and the small terraced house remained a home, though it was no longer a place of desperation. David took on his role at the youth center, with a passion he hadn't known he possessed. He became a pillar of the community, helping other struggling families navigate the very systems that had nearly crushed him. Lily flourished, her laughter now a constant soundtrack to their lives. Clara stayed in the box room for the remainder of the school year. Finishing her term at the college, she eventually moved into a modest flat nearby, choosing to remain close to the life she had built rather than returning to the cold opulence of her family's estate. The relationship between David and Clara evolved into something deep and enduring. It wasn't a fairy tale of a peasant marrying a princess. but rather a story of two people who had found exactly what they were missing in each other. David found the stability and confidence to dream again, and Clara found the authenticity and purpose she had been searching for her entire life. They often sat in the garden on summer evenings, watching the sunset over the rooftops Clara had saved. The secret of her heritage was no longer a burden or a weapon. It was simply a part of a larger story about the unexpected ways life compensates those who remain kind in the face of suffering. The lesson they both learned was one they shared with anyone who would listen. Wealth is not just about the numbers in a ledger, and poverty is not just a lack of funds. True wealth is found in the courage to help someone when you have nothing, and true power is the ability to use what you have to lift others up. David often looked back at the rainy day when he had clutched that eviction notice. Feeling like the world was ending, he realized now that it was actually beginning. The stranger he had let into his home had indeed changed his life. But not just with her money. She had changed it by reminding him that he was worthy of a better future. As the story of the single dad and the heiress teacher became a local legend, it served as a reminder to the entire city. It reminded people to look twice at the strangers they encounter, to offer a hand even when their own is shaking, and to never underestimate the ripples of a single act of kindness. In the end, David didn't just rent out a room. He opened a door to a new world. And Clara didn't just hide a secret. She found a home. They had both been searching for something, and they found it in the most unlikely of places, within the walls of a small, groaning house that was held together by nothing more than hope and the quiet strength of two people who refused to give up on each other. We often go through life thinking that our struggles define us, or that a lack of resources means a lack of value. But as David and Clara's story shows, the smallest act of hospitality can trigger a chain reaction of miracles. Kindness is a currency that never devalues, and when you give it freely, it always finds its way back to you, often in ways you could never imagine. If you are going through a hard time right now, remember that you never know who is about to walk through your door, or what secrets the universe is waiting to reveal. Keep your heart open, keep your head high, and remember that your current chapter is not your whole story.